Good afternoon and welcome to the Outdoor Recreation Council of BC's May webinar. My name is Ryan Stewart and I'm facilitating today's webinar. I'm going to give folks a minute or so to log in. In the meantime, I'd love to get a sense of who all is out there. The format of this Zoom webinar is such that we can't see you and you can't see each other. So I invite you to jump into the chat and add your name, where you're logging in from, and maybe something about your last recreation session. For me, I'm in the Comox Valley on Vancouver Island. And yesterday I went for a nice long run on the trails managed by the United Riders of Cumberland. I'm training for the QSM Climb, a mountain race up in Sayward on Vancouver Island here. And so my run yesterday was mostly straight uphill and then a long gradual descent on some wonderful mountain bike trails. While the rest of you weigh in there and let us know what you've been up to, I'll let you know a little about today's webinar. We have 4 guest speakers with us today who will unpack a new guidebook to building outdoor recreation in rural communities. We're really excited about this new guidebook, and I was lucky enough to play a part in putting it together. I wrote a bunch of case studies about some of the real world practices of the ideas and the tips in the guidebook. So a really fun project to be involved with. I will also say that we are recording this webinar, and tomorrow you'll get an email with the recording, any takeaways or additional resources that pop up during today's discussion, and then more about the guidebook as well. You can pop questions into the Q&A at any time, and we'll do our best to answer them. Some of them might get answered during the panel discussion, and otherwise I'll save some for the actual Q&A session a little later on. All right, so I think with that, I'm going to share my screen and we'll get going. Okay. Again, welcome to today's webinar, Leveraging Fun and Introduction to the ORCBC's new guidebook to building thriving outdoor recreation communities. You should have received a link to the guidebook yesterday in an email. If not, I'm just going to pop it into the chat right now. So you can pull it up and take a look if you'd like. Before we get too deep in today's topic, a little bit of housekeeping. First, I want to acknowledge that I am grateful to live, work, and play on the ancestral territory of the Comox First Nation. In the spirit of reconciliation, we're making a donation to the Circle of Indigenous Nations Society. They're based in the West Kootenays and Boundary region, and the charity provides children and family services that are rooted in Indigenous practices. Here's today's agenda. We'll start with presentations from the authors of the guidebook, followed by a question and answer session. If you have any questions during the webinar, pop them in the Q&A button there. We'll do our best to answer them all, get them sent to the guest to answer. And I apologize in advance if we miss any. Sometimes we just run out of time. We'll wrap things up around 1 p.m. Pacific time. And immediately following the webinar is a super short survey. Please stick around and take a moment to fill it out. It helps us do a better job with these webinars in general, and this one in specific is about the guidebook, so your input would be really helpful. All right. This is part of a monthly series of webinars hosted by the Outdoor Recreation Council of BC. The ORCBC represents more than 100 nonprofit organizations in over 100,000 British Columbians. They range from hunting and fishing associations to rockhounds and equestrian groups, bird watchers, and snowmobile clubs. The ORCBC is the only unified voice for the outdoor recreation in the province. It does many things to promote a healthier recreation sector, including advocacy work and educational and capacity building efforts. As a nonprofit, we rely on outside funding sources, including donations from people like you. Your contribution helps us continue developing free resources like this guidebook, and all the donations are tax deductible and eligible for tax receipt. You can find out more about the ORCBC at orcbc.ca. All right, today's webinar, let's get on to it. This is a great example of those educational and capacity building efforts I was just mentioning. We often hear from rural communities that they are interested in developing their outdoor recreation ecosystem. But they also mentioned that they're facing increasing pressures. They have more people out there recreating and little capacity and limited funding to help respond to that need. They don't often know where to start. And the ORCBC saw the need for a practical tool to help them get going, no matter where they were, literally or figuratively. So we partnered with Selkirk Innovates at Selkirk College to develop this guidebook. Funding came from the Economic Trust of the Southern Interior and from the provincial government through the Rural Economic Diversification and Infrastructure Program. The result is the Outdoor Recreation for Community and Economic Development, a guidebook for rural British Columbia communities. The guidebook goes live on our website tomorrow. Today, you get a sneak peek behind the scenes tour with the authors, Sarah Breen and Lauren Rethoret. Sarah is the BC Regional Innovation Chair in Rural Economic Development at Selkirk Innovates. Lauren is the faculty researcher at Selkirk Innovates. And we have two additional guests who will also join the conversation to put what the guidebook talks about into real world context. They are both in Tumbler Ridge in the province's northeast. Outdoor recreation features prominently in the town's diversification strategy. Sherry Lynn Hewitt is the executive director of the Tumbler Ridge Outdoor Recreation Association, an umbrella group of 4 outdoor recreation clubs in Tumbler Ridge. And Jesse Olson is the director of economic and community development for the district of Tumbler Ridge. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to stop sharing and hand things over to Sarah and Lauren.
Thanks, Ryan. Okay, I'll get our presentation going here. Okay, there we go. Let me know if you can't see it for some reason. So let's dig into the guidebook and talk a little bit about what we've developed here. As Ryan mentioned, my name is Lauren Rethoret. I am with Selkirk Innovates at Selkirk College, and I would like to acknowledge that our college operates on the traditional territories of the Sinixt, Ktunaxa, Secwepemc, and Syilx nations, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and play outside on these beautiful territories. The purpose of the guidebook, the ultimate goal is to help rural communities understand and leverage outdoor recreation in order to identify and pursue improvements to quality of life. So in some cases that happens through economic development or diversification, but it can also happen through other community development pathways like resident retention or improvements to population health. It's primarily written for local governments who often find themselves in the role of convener of community projects and priorities. But it's also highly relevant to economic developers, nonprofits, Indigenous nations. They'll all find lots of information in here that's relevant to their own operations. Just a bit about the research that underpins the guidebook. We did a literature review and consolidated information from many foundational reports, articles, and other guides that exist on outdoor recreation topics. And then we did a series of 6 focus groups with almost 50 outdoor recreation experts from across British Columbia. We did a second set of focus groups following development of a draft guide and just kind of validate content and find out what we missed. And then the whole project was informed by a technical advisory group that consisted of 8 additional outdoor recreation leaders from various sectors and perspectives that are relevant to outdoor recreation. So in total, kind of like 70 outdoor recreation folks engaged through this project. We thought it was important to define outdoor recreation to know what's in and out of scope when we talk about outdoor recreation development. So the Outdoor Recreation Council of BC considers outdoor recreation to be activities that take place in natural settings, so most commonly parks, trails, natural aquatic areas, and it doesn't include activities that take place in highly cultivated recreation areas, so places like playgrounds, skate parks, or you can see in that image that I put a red arrow pointing at the golf course. So building on that definition, the guidebook takes a broad view of outdoor recreation, including not just consideration of outdoor assets and activities, but also businesses, experiential retail, and even the growing outdoor recreation manufacturing and technology sector, and then relationships with other sectors like food service and accommodations. In terms of why a community would want to leverage outdoor recreation as a pathway to development, the list of potential benefits is long. One obvious one is the potential for economic diversification. You know, if properly managed, outdoor recreation driven tourism can become a sustainable industry that exists alongside other sectors like forestry, mining, and agriculture. The economic impact can be significant. So in Golden, annual direct expenditures by mountain bikers alone were estimated at 5.8 million in one study. Benefits of outdoor or economic development outside of economic development can include things like an enhanced sense of community or commitment to place, an opportunity to connect with Indigenous peoples and advance reconciliation objectives, or a stronger commitment to conservation among the local population. Tips for capturing benefits are included in different sections throughout the guides, as are tips for avoiding potential challenges, because of course it's not all great news. There's definitely some common pitfalls associated with a development approach that centers on outdoor recreation, and careful planning is needed to avoid these. Things like degradation of the very environment that draws people outside in the first place, or an increase in community conflict if there's disagreements around how outdoor recreation should be developed or who it's for. So at the start of the guidebook, there's a set of principles that serve as kind of like general guidance through all phases of outdoor recreation development. And I won't go through these all, but again, you can always consult the guidebook, but I'll cover just a few. The first one is always keep an eye on your why. So this is about knowing why and for who your community is focusing on outdoor recreation as a development driver. And knowing and continuously working towards that purpose is going to help you achieve your intended results. The second, focus on local needs before those of visitors. We heard this really clearly in our focus groups. It's about keeping the needs of residents at the forefront of your planning to be sure that the benefits of outdoor recreation extend beyond visitors or tourism-focused businesses. And then another one is plan for realistic timelines. Don't expect quick results. It takes time to build the relationships and the community support that's needed to ensure a successful initiative, and as well as obtain the necessary approvals. Can take a few years. We've designed the guidebook to be adaptable to your needs, recognizing that communities have a unique mix of assets and capacities, and that all are different all are at different stages of development. A prescriptive or one-size-fits-all approach would definitely not be appropriate for BC communities. So with that in mind, we've included a questionnaire that helps you find the sections that match the current stage of development and interests for your community. And then based on your answers, you're directed to certain sections of the guidebook. So without further ado, let's move into the meat of the guidebook and discussion of the key elements of outdoor recreation development. So in the core of the guidebook, we present background information, best practices, case studies, and supplementary resources under the headings of 10 elements. And the guidebook acknowledges that these elements are all interconnected. So just because they're presented in a certain order, that doesn't mean that a community would necessarily start in the same place or follow the same progression. And many of these elements, for example, funding outdoor recreation, they'll apply no matter where a community is at in their outdoor recreation development journey. So we'll go through these elements one by one in this presentation, but again, I'm not going to cover everything that we cover in the guidebook. Obviously, it's like 70 pages, so I'll highlight just a couple points that we discuss in each section. Starting with building a core team. Initiatives tend to have small core teams and then bigger peripheral teams. And when doing the research for the guidebook, we heard time and time again about the critical role of the champion in the core team. So this was described as one person who was really the heart and soul of the project, especially in the early phases. And that champion is really needed to push that initiative forward through competing priorities, to build those initial relationships and to mobilize support for a project that they're really passionate about. Another thing that came through strongly in this section was capacity for the core team. So, capacity is needed in the form of time, funding, skills, knowledge, relationships, and the initial work to kind of explore the feasibility of outdoor recreation development, that might be done on a volunteer basis. But our focus group participants were really emphatic that once an initiative takes shape, it's important to provide the core team with dedicated workload and funding. And that was a really critical indicator of long-term success. So this is one of the quotes that came up during our focus groups that exemplifies that emphasis on champions. What it boiled down to was a very committed group of people that were willing to volunteer their time to build it, and they were able to solicit a lot of support throughout the community. And that's from Wayne Robinson, who's the CAO of NACUSP. Understanding your context, this section is all about kind of gathering the evidence or information you need to make quality decisions and to efficiently use your limited resources. So these are some of the venues that can help you develop that knowledge base. In this section, I want to highlight the process of mapping your outdoor recreation assets alongside the assets that support outdoor recreation. Signage, parking, retail services, public transportation, ecosystems, washrooms, all of those types of things. So asset mapping is an intentional effort to bring together not only knowledge of not only what exists and where it exists, but also how recreation and supporting assets are used and by whom. Results are really helpful for informing management and planning that's responsive to the strengths and gaps of the local context. Asset mapping is most effective when it involves contributions from multiple people or organizations. The more voices you gather, the more comprehensive your results are going to be. You'll also want to collect information on your user groups and businesses, either by reviewing existing studies or gathering new data. And when you've learned everything you can about your local context, your next step is to bring it all together to analyze strengths and gaps with an eye to identifying where your outdoor recreation development initiative should focus. So one way to do that is through a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, or SWOT analysis. And the guidebook includes a worksheet to help you do a SWOT analysis with, it's got lots of different themes for you to kind of think through in the assessment, as well as some guiding questions that can help you make sense of and act on results. So this is one of 4 worksheets that are included with the guidebook. Each has a blank fillable version and then a version populated with sample content. Working toward reconciliation, Indigenous communities and groups are vital partners in outdoor recreation development, and in many cases are leading some of the standout initiatives. It's always important to start with acknowledging truths before moving on to reconciliation. So we understand and acknowledge that outdoor recreation has contributed to colonialism and had associated negative impacts on some Indigenous communities. Notably, most recreation sites in BC exist on unceded lands and were created without the consent of First Nations. In terms of how we can work towards righting those historic wrongs, there are some established best practices for engagement and relationship building with Indigenous groups. And one of those is to do your homework. So before, attempting to reach out and build relationships, take the time to educate yourself about where you are and what the priorities of the local nations are. Another is listen more, talk less. So instead of coming to a nation with a specific idea on how you want to work together, ask how you can help and be an effective ally, or listen for common interests that you can work on together. There's also an opportunity for non-Indigenous communities to support and enable Indigenous-led outdoor recreation. So some of the ways that can happen is by co-planning initiatives with First Nations or helping to build their capacity for outdoor recreation development, supporting development of assets prioritized by Indigenous groups, or promoting Indigenous-led experiences to visitors. The guidebook features at least one case study per element, and the one we feature for the reconciliation section is relates to mountain biking at the Simpcw First Nation. So the story here, Tom Eustace and his son Skylar first built a few mountain bike trails on the hill above the Simpcw First Nation band office for their own enjoyment. But then they invited Patrick Lucas and Thomas Schoen to help them turn the trails into something more. So Lucas and Schoen had founded First Journey Trails, which is a company that collaborates with First Nations on trail development projects. And the Simpcw First Nation was one of their first projects. So they helped the nation access grants, train the community's youth, and then paid them to build the trails. And for many teens, it was their first job and provided skills that kind of led to different opportunities down the road. The trails also benefited community health. So they were used by all sorts of different users, and the nation's health department noticed. And then so they stepped up and started to fund trail maintenance as well. So, building the trails became an act of reconciliation, helped form strong relationships between the nation and settler groups, and helped the Simpcw people form a different type of connection to their land and culture. Speaking of relationship building, it was a major theme in our background research. The guidebook includes a list of important players in the local recscape. So we've got First Nations, recreation clubs, alliances, economic development groups, landowners, regulators, et cetera, et cetera. And the first step in relationship building is really about knowing who you must build those relationships with. So there's a worksheet in the guide to help identify who are the individuals are that you should be working with. One piece to highlight in this section, volunteerism. Relationships with volunteers are really important for many outdoor recreation groups. Of course, volunteers bring local expertise, cost effectiveness, community engagement, but working with volunteers can bring challenges. So volunteer burnout, where volunteers become less enthusiastic or willing to participate over time. It's a common problem. The guidebook provides a list of strategies to minimize the potential for this challenge. Also, navigating conflict was another major theme in our research. Conflict is inevitable when diverse organizations come together, whether in long-term partnerships or over emerging challenges. And the issue is not whether you experience conflict, but rather how you address it. So the guidebook includes general principles for conflict management in the outdoor recreation context and a few great resources. So speaking of resources, this is a sample of the type of featured resource that we include throughout the guidebook. We know there's a lot of information that's already out there that's really helpful for outdoor recreation, and we didn't necessarily want to duplicate all that rich information, or we'd end up with a 500-page guidebook. So we point readers to some foundational documents where they can get more guidance on specific themes that are relevant to them. So under the relationship section, we feature a series of templates and books to help organizations effectively manage volunteers. That includes the How to Start a Volunteer Program handbook from Volunteer BC. It's a good place to start for individuals or organizations who are new to volunteer management. And then we also feature Connected and Directed from Connect the Dots, which is a guide to managing conflict in participatory processes. And it provides concrete advice for organizations in the position of facilitating some contentious community conversations. Moving on to funding, this is obviously a big one for outdoor recreation. We don't include a specific list of grants, knowing that these kind of come and go all the time, but we do link to an online grant database managed by ORCBC, and we do talk about the range of potential funding sources beyond grants. So things like local government services that can access taxation or user fees or tourism and business contributions, that type of thing. There are some definite challenges that surround the outdoor recreation funding landscape, and the guidebook acknowledges those. One is, kind of demonstrated by this quote. It's about a lack of ongoing operational funding. Another is about the disconnect between who benefits and who pays for outdoor recreation in BC communities. Research participants spoke of various iterations of a situation where a community marketed outdoor recreation assets, which helped bring in visitors, but the money those visitors were spending in the community was not making its way back to the trail societies that were maintaining those vital assets. So the guidebook offers a couple of examples of communities that have worked through that challenge. The case study in this section is the Regional District of Bulkley-Nechaco's Recreation Contribution Program. So this is a local government service that creates a grant that can be accessed by recreation-focused organizations. Where there's definitely other funding sources out there for new infrastructure and equipment, few target, as I mentioned, that those day-to-day costs of keeping trails or campsites and other services open. And so that's really what this program is designed to help with. And so nonprofit recreation societies and clubs can apply for up to $15,000 for 3 years of funding towards operational expenses. So on to kind of the planning piece and the development of a vision, goals, and actions. A vision, it's really an opportunity to think about what success looks like and plan how you're going to achieve your goals. And when setting a vision, it's important to kind of ask yourself what you want outdoor recreation to look like in your community over the short, medium, and long term. Local governments are well poised to help their communities craft a vision that sees the big picture and links it to other priorities. And then it's critical that your vision is set with input from across your community. If your community can't agree on the vision, take the time you need to understand perspectives and build support before moving ahead with planning or implementation. This section also speaks to managing change, and of course, more users on a land base can affect environmental values or social values, and also stress community infrastructure. So recognizing and minimizing those impacts is important to maintain community support, preserve environmental integrity, and ensure a quality experience for recreationists. And the feature resource in this section is one on avoiding the amenity trap by Headwaters Economics, who's a nonprofit U.S. research group focused on community development. This resource is all about using planning as a tool for communities to avoid being loved to death. Protecting the environment, despite what many of us might like to believe, recreation has an impact. And if this impact isn't carefully managed, it can degrade the natural environment we love so much and negate the long-term benefits that a community might experience from outdoor recreation. The first step in protecting the environment is really getting to know it. Take the time to understand wildlife needs, ecosystems, and the lands that surround your community. It's best practice to hire a biologist to perform kind of environmental review as part of your planning process, but there's also ways that and some public data sources available to support a more desktop-oriented analysis. It's also likely that community members hold wisdom that can be really helpful in this review. The guidebook outlines a few strategies to avoid or reduce negative impacts and also links to some great resources that provide further detail. And we also talk about climate change in this section. So outdoor recreation contributes to climate change through fuel consumption, land use changes, but it can also enable some positive changes that kind of build the natural resilience of wild spaces. The guidebook includes recommendations around reducing greenhouse gas emissions and fostering nature-based solutions to climate change, things like supporting the preservation of functioning ecosystems. In this section, we speak to the Central Selkirk Snowmobile Management Area as an example of an innovative approach to managing conflict between recreationists and wildlife. The story here, that the same mountain environment that attracts snowmobilers to Trout Lake is also vital habitat to threatened southern mountain caribou. Recognizing the potential impact, the provincial government worked with two local snowmobile clubs and other user groups to develop the Central Selkirk Snowmobile Management Plan. So the program relies on GPS collars that are placed on 9 members of the caribou herd, and then the biologists divided the herd's range into 60 individual zones that kind of correspond to creek drainages. So every night throughout the winter, an autonomous program pings the GPS collars, and an algorithm then opens and closes individual zones to maintain a 2-kilometer buffer between the animals and snowmobilers. And before heading out each morning, the snowmobilers access an online map to see where they can ride that day. On to developing and maintaining experiences and assets. This is often where communities jump to, but as we've demonstrated, it's just one piece of the outdoor recreation development puzzle. We heard many groups are confused by the regulatory environment in BC. So in this section, we provided an overview of land use and access requirements, including key policies and management frameworks that are relevant to outdoor recreation. And then we've covered a few factors that are ideally integrated into the design of any outdoor recreation ecosystem. First, groups need to plan for maintenance. Often communities and recreation groups focus on developing a new asset without making adequate plans for long-term maintenance. The necessary time, people power, and money really needs to all be accounted for in your development plans if you're aiming for sustainability. Another important consideration is designing for accessibility. So, not every asset or experience can or should be equally accessible, but your community's approach to outdoor recreation development should consider how you'll accommodate the full range of user groups and abilities across the array of assets or programs. It's also important to bring in active voices from people in equity deserving groups. So most communities now have an accessibility committee established under the Accessible BC Act, and that can be a valuable resource for you. And then another important piece here is not to forget about your business assets, and look for opportunities to grow, support, and scale up outdoor recreation businesses and entrepreneurship. So these are some of the resources that we feature in this section. There's the Resident Retention and Attraction Guidebook for rural British Columbia. That includes information on how to assess your community's level of readiness to grow your population and what infrastructure or service needs should be considered alongside development of recreation assets. And there's a couple of really valuable accessibility resources, including the Willamette Partnership's Accessibility Toolkit, and that helps outdoor recreation managers understand disabilities and design accessible experiences. Mhm. Getting the word out about these experiences that you've worked hard to create. The audience for your marketing campaign is the same as the target audience for your community's overall recreation development program. So if your community is supportive of using outdoor recreation to grow a visitor economy, then your marketing can be targeted to areas and groups where those visitors are likely to be. And good market research can help you know more about that audience. But if your community views outdoor recreation as a driver of health and quality of life for residents, then your marketing should be focused locally. And if your community is struggling to manage visitation, then perhaps you pause marketing until you've had the opportunity to develop a visitor use management strategy. Differentiation and brand creation, it's important that your brand communicates what makes your community special, noting that much of BC offers access to beautiful outdoor spaces and a laid back quality of life. Beyond that, what else can you offer? So this quote from our focus groups at the bottom of the page there, that really captures that message. So the guidebook outlines some of the tools that you can use to get the word out, including a website, social media, events, among others. But it's a well-developed industry, so it's a good time to bring in external expertise if that's something that your community has the capacity for. The case study we highlighted in this section is Ride Island. So that's a brand for Vancouver Island's mountain biking scene. Just about every community has its own mountain bike trail network. And while it's never far between them, each has its own unique character. And the campaign aims to use stories to highlight what differentiates each community while also capturing the breadth of what's on offer. It's a collaborative project funded by members of the Vancouver Island Mountain Bike Tourism Consortium with matching funds from Destination BC. And our very last element is about monitoring your progress and taking next steps based on results. So monitoring can be simple or complex, and you can scale it to match your community's capacity. The guidebook offers a few different approaches to monitoring and notes the factors that can increase cost and complexity. It also notes that a small amount of data consistently collected showing trends over time can be just as valuable or maybe more valuable than a single point in time study. But there's definitely times when an investment in high quality or detailed data might be warranted. We also offer some direction on how to act on the results of your monitoring initiatives, because of course there's no point in gathering the data if you're not going to use it. So whether it involves adjusting annual operating budgets, telling stories and celebrating successes, or revisiting your vision or action plan, there's many ways that monitoring can help your community advance its goals. And the case study we feature in this section is the 2019 Fraser Valley Outdoor Recreation Economic Impact Report. So, based on thousands of surveys, supplemented with trail counters and data from participating organizations, the study produced insights on recreation habits, demographics, and spending. Results suggested the region's a growing outdoor hub and highlighted specific opportunities to capitalize on emerging opportunities. And with this data in mind, now the region now has a guide for where to put their money and energy in the future. So that's it for me. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Sarah, and she was going to be speaking with a couple of folks from the Tumbler Ridge Outdoor Recreation Association.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lauren. Excellent presentation. While you stop sharing and Jesse and Sherry Lynn get their cameras on, I want to just give a shout out and a thank you to all of the participants in today's webinar who also participated in the engagement sessions that helped form this guidebook. I was watching the participants list, and I can see there's a number of you on here today, and so I just wanted to take the time to say thank you for everyone's participation. And with that, we are lucky enough to be joined by two folks from the district of Tumbler Ridge to talk to us about one of the case studies that we feature in the guidebook. And so the Tumbler Ridge Outdoor Recreation Association is featured in the Building a Core Team section, emphasizing the importance of collaboration. And so, with Jesse and Sherry Lynn joining us today, I have a few questions for you, starting with maybe for those who aren't familiar, can you give us the 2-minute summary of the Tumbler Ridge Outdoor Recreation Association?
Sure, I can start that off. Thanks, Sarah. Just again, I wanted to introduce myself, Jesse Olson, Director of Economic and Community Development at the District of Tumbler Ridge. We're located on the traditional ancestral territory of the Denezaw, Saulteaux, Sicanni, Cree, and Métis peoples, including the nations of the McLeod Lake Indian Bands, Saulteaux First Nations, West Moberly First Nations, Cree Lake Nation, Kelly Lake Cree Nation, and Kelly Lake Métis Settlement Society, all within Treaty 8 territory. So just a quick overview of Trora. The idea started back in 2022 when a couple of our outdoor recreation clubs, along with our then Director of Economic Development, Therese Finnegan, recognized the need for a more unified structure to support recreation in the region. At the time, the clubs were all facing similar challenges: volunteer burnout, inconsistent funding, missed opportunities to work together. At the same time, we were seeing an interest in Tumbler Ridge as a tourism destination, and we knew we needed a coordinated approach to make sure that growth was sustainable and community focused. So those early conversations led to the decision to form a nonprofit. In 2023, the Tumbler Ridge Outdoor Recreation Association, Trora, we like to call it, was officially incorporated. While it's still in its early days, the goal is to bring people together, support the volunteer base, advocate for responsible recreation, and represent the shared interests of our trail-based user groups. So alongside the founding clubs, both Therese and I were actively involved in helping get Trora off the ground, and it's been great to see how far it's come already. And I'll pass that over to Sherry Lynn to add a little more.
Thanks, Jesse. My name is Sherry Lynn Hewitt, and I'm the Interim Executive Director of Trora. So the founding clubs of Trora are the Wolverine Nordic and Mountain Society, the Tumbler Ridge Mountain Bike Association, the Grizzly Valley ATV Club, the Tumbler Ridge Ridge Riders Snowmobile Association, and the Tumbler Ridge UNESCO Global Geopark also holds a permanent board seat. One of the first major steps the group took was a strategic planning session. That process helped each club reflect on what was working, what their limitations were, and where shared support could make a difference. From that, Trora's 6 strategic goals were developed: to collaborate and support outdoor recreation in Tumbler Ridge, ensure long-term planning and organizational stability, lead in responsible outdoor recreation and environmental conservation, strategically enhance trails for enjoyment and accessibility, develop high-value partnerships, and advocate and plan for a sustainable future. Everything we're working on now is about turning those goals into action. We're still early in that process, but having clarity and buy-in from all the clubs has been key.
Awesome. Thank you to you both. So something that we heard a lot about when we were creating this guidebook was the need to give people details on the how. Like it's super easy to say, oh, we should be collaborating, and actually executing that can look very challenging. So can you tell us about the working relationships between the different groups that are participating, and how you navigate ups and downs within that collaboration?
Thanks, Eric. So I guess the first thing is that Trora started as a registered BC nonprofit, and we are a board made up of one representative from each founding club, and a representative from the UNESCO Global Geopark, and we have 3 community members at large. This structure is laid out in our bylaws, and while we haven't formalized our external partnerships through things like MOUs yet, that's a future step as we continue to grow. We have monthly board meetings, and everyone has an equal voice. My role as the executive director is to support coordination and follow through. Some of the approaches that have helped build a strong working relationship include a support-focused structure rather than a centralized one, transparency in finances and communication, and especially respect for each other's group's autonomy. Each of the Trora's founding clubs operate independently. They maintain control over their own trails, volunteers, programming, and planning. Trora doesn't manage or fund them. Instead, we support them by promoting their work and events, advocating for outdoor recreation at a regional level, sharing funding opportunities, and helping with administrative requirements when asked, and coordinating meetings and stakeholder engagement, and facilitating and shared conversations and collaboration. This strategic plan was really what the foundation for this. It gave us a common direction, and that plan's what allowed us to stay focused and without creating unnecessary overlap.
And just to add a little bit to that, the district is not a voting member of Trora's board. We do regularly attend the meetings and contribute through project partnerships. The relationship is collaborative, and we share information to support each other's initiatives and work together when it makes sense. Trora has helped bring more alignment across the recreation sector in Tumbler Ridge. They've been a great partner in regional planning conversations, helped coordinate the community events, and played a key role in the early stages of our trails and destination management strategy. We really see Trora as the connector, linking the grassroots recreation efforts to the broader tourism and economic development strategies. And as our community continues to diversify, that kind of coordination is essential.
And how has the initiative been resourced so far?
To date, I mean, the biggest expense that Trora has is the executive director position, and the initial funding for that came from South Peace Mackenzie Trust, the Tumbler Ridge Community Forest, as well as Canuma Resources. For other projects and things that we've been doing, of course, there's fundraisers, we've received donations, and also the NDIT and ORCBC have provided project-based funding for us. We are in the process. We've developed a corporate membership model to hopefully be able to support future sustainability for this position, but it hasn't launched yet. Like many things, it's part of what we're still building. We also rely heavily on non-financial contributions. Clubs donate their time, expertise, and equipment. Local businesses provide services, food, prizes, and support. And of course, with the district, I mean, as Jesse's already mentioned, coordination with staff and alignment with policy. These contributions have been essential in helping Trora get started with very limited core resources.
One thing that stood out to me about this example is that connection between Trora and the local government. Because across BC, we have excellent outdoor recreation amenities in a lot of places, but there's not always that link to local planning and economic development. Can you tell us a little bit about how that connection was made and what it means to the development of the community?
Sure, yeah. So Trora brings together our core recreation groups, both from motorized and non-motorized, and that unified voice has made it a lot easier across many things. They're a key project partner in the Trails and Destination Management Strategy. As I already mentioned, we are co-leading that project together, which was funded by Pacificans Tourism Growth Program. And while that work's just getting underway, Trora will provide valuable input from the trail user community through the process. And in parallel to that project, we're also deep into developing a new economic development strategy for Tumbler Ridge, and Trora has been engaged as a key stakeholder in those discussions as well, helping shape that vision where outdoor recreation is recognized as a meaningful contributor to our long-term economic resilience. The work has also helped local businesses see the bigger picture. When more people are out enjoying the trails, whether they're locals or visitors, they're fueling, eating at the restaurants, staying overnight, and supporting our shops. So Trora's leadership's helping grow that recreation-based economy that supports our business community and benefits the town as a whole. Sherilyn, did you have more to add to that?
Well, I think I just, would point out that, economic development was something that we wanted to make sure was part of our core objectives. It's built right into Goal 6 to advocate and plan for a sustainable future, which includes supporting tourism partnerships, adventure tourism development, and recreation-based growth. At Trora, we also help and promote and support community events that contribute directly to tourism and the local businesses through things like our golf tournament, a Winterfest event. helping clubs with their events like the Emperor's Challenge, the ATV Poker Ride, the Ridge Riders FMX shows. I mean, these events bring people to Tumbler Ridge, like Jesse said, and spend money locally.
Well, fantastic. Thank you, both of you, for agreeing to be interviewed as part of this webinar. And I want to point out to everyone that's listening, the cases that we included within the guidebook are from all different types of communities and places, different sports, different stages, different topics. And what we were really trying to make it so that people could see themselves reflected in this guidebook, so that it wasn't, case studies from places that didn't resonate with folks across BC. So that's what we were aiming for. Just checking the time. I want to make sure that we leave some time today to deal with questions that the audience might have. So can I turn things over to you, Ryan, to facilitate the Q&A?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And I can say, having looked at the guidebook, that it's really, really rich, but also very approachable. The way you guys put it together it feels like wherever you are, wherever your interest, whether you've got something developed or have been doing this for a long time, I think there's value there for just about everyone. So yeah, we'll move to the question and answer session. Pop your questions into that Q&A button just at the bottom of your screen there. And I'll get going with a couple that came in through registration. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that tension that sometimes exists between when a community is thinking of this in a economic diversification strategy, going from potentially maybe more resource-based to thinking of this recreation or tourism, and the tension that can sometimes exist. So how can we sort of preserve how do we preserve rather than displace local identity and community agency? And I think that's maybe something that you guys have dealt with up in Tumbler Ridge. So maybe Jesse or Sherry Lynn could jump in to start there, of how you've sort of balanced those two.
Sure. Yeah, it's definitely come up, and I think we kind of started going through this back in 2014 when the UNESCO Global Geopark designation first came along, about how's that identity going to work with what Tumbler Ridge was before. People were holding on to their trails and didn't want to share them, and I think that as time has went on, those partnerships between the Geopark, Trora, Cumberland Resources, that's our main mining operator, everybody is just working so well together. And I think that that's just such a huge part of all this work, is build those relationships early, because then when an idea like this comes up, it's so much easier to already have those connections and feel like you can, make that transition to something new. And I think that when it comes to resource too, I know that this can work in both ways, but the access to lots of these areas that we use for outdoor recreation wouldn't be here if it weren't for those resource industries being there first.
Yeah. Sherry Lynn, did you have anything to add there?
I think, like Jesse said, ensuring that you reach out and build those relationships early. Really, a lot of what industry does, I mean, aside from, of course, their bottom line, is also building communities. So they want to be there to help and to see these things succeed. So making sure that they're at the table is definitely key.
And Sarah, I know this is something close to your heart. I know you have strong feelings about this. So I'll let you have a chance to weigh in as well.
Me, strong feelings, never. So I think relationships and language are a big part of this. Relationships in terms of everything that Jesse and Sherry Lynn were saying, of, the more we have close relationships across economic sectors and between groups, the easier it is to build something together and to overcome conflict. It's a lot harder to be angry at somebody when you have a good working relationship with them and you understand where they're coming from, and it creates that incentive to get past the problem. And I also mentioned that language is important, because we often hear outdoor recreation or tourism framed as a transition from, a natural resource-based economy, like a transition from forestry to tourism. And it doesn't have to be that way. Economic diversification is more about making a community stronger. So you're not trying to replace something that's still an important part of your community. You're trying to enhance and support it. In a lot of ways, it can become part of the worker retention and attraction strategy, you'll have better luck as an industry attracting and retaining top tier talent if they have a spectacular place to live where they have good trails that they can access and those recreation opportunities. So I think it's important for all of us to build those good relationships and also to pay attention to the language that we're using so that we're being inclusive, like building an inclusive integrated community that's leveraging all of these strengths as opposed to replacing one with the other.
Thank you very much. Lauren, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
No, I think they've covered it. Thanks.
Yeah, excellent. We had a couple questions come in during registration that talked a little bit about how applicable this guidebook is to, say, a rural island community or First Nations or places that are more remote, maybe struggle with the budget and the funding, the resources. Maybe they don't even have an access to public lands to build kind of outdoor recreation upon. Can Sarah and Lauren, can you talk a little bit about, the context of this and how applicable it is for those sorts of places?
Yeah, and I apologize because I keep looking at my other screen because that's where my notes are for this. So we heard about communities that have less public land to work with, and the importance of trying to include that within the guidebook. And the main message is that those access agreements, whether it's on public land, which still requires, permits and a regulatory process, or on private land, which requires some sort of agreement, again, relationships, agreements, building that together. And I would add that for those places that have, say, more private land than public land, I would look to cases that fall outside of BC and even outside of Canada. So within Canada, you can look at smaller places like PEI or parts of Nova Scotia where there's a more private land, but also look to cases within the European context like Scotland's Highlands and Islands region. There's a lot more transferability because they deal with more private land, basically. But it's, finding those examples that resonate with you and looking to what they did and how you can and adapt that for your context. Lauren, is there anything you wanted to add?
But just on the piece related to relevance to Indigenous communities, the guidebook, it wasn't specifically written for First Nations, as we recognize that the context there is unique from non-Indigenous communities. And so, and then we also recognize that any resource directed at Indigenous communities needs to be co-developed with Indigenous contributors. So that said, we do acknowledge definitely that First Nations will be able to find some value in the guidebook in areas where we've provided advice that seems to resonate. Yeah, but it wasn't like it wasn't the main audience that the guidebook was designed around.
We had a couple questions kind of related to the environment and where does protecting the environment fit into the conversation? You touched on that, I think, in one of the elements in particular, but maybe you can just elaborate a little more.
Yep, it's there's a whole section in the guidebook on protecting the environment, and so we acknowledge that as a really critical component of outdoor recreation. And the goal is definitely to facilitate experiences that don't do irreparable harm to the environment that we've all come to enjoy in the first place. So, looking at the guidebook, some of the pieces that we cover in this section, recommendations to help you get to know the local environment, strategies to reduce impact. So things like designing for low trail speeds to reduce the potential for human-wildlife encounters, options for educating users and mitigating climate change impacts. And then there's also a little bit on how you might view recreation as stewardship and turn recreation into something that might actually be nature positive instead of just an attempt to avoid negative impact. And then we also link to some really great resources that have more specific guidance on those pieces around how to design outdoor recreation assets to have the least impact on environment.
Jesse or Sherry Lynn, is that something that you can speak to in the Tumbler Ridge situation? Like, has this led to stewardship initiatives or better environmental practices with the trail groups?
I can definitely speak to that one. That is, of course, being one of our main strategic goals, something our clubs have been working at through all of their events, and I guess through social media, is making sure that we follow practices like the leave no trace, pack out what you pack in. Really reaching out to the youth as well, making sure that they understand the importance of what these practices are and maintaining the trails when they're out there, whether they're using motorized and that they're following the leads and they're not going on non-motorized trails with them, and essentially making sure that it's there for them to be able to enjoy for years to come. So
Nice. Anyone want to add anything else? All right, so question from the registration as well. What are the risks of over-reliance on outdoor recreation as an economic pillar, and how can communities mitigate those vulnerabilities?
Having all of your eggs in one basket is still having all of your eggs in one basket. It doesn't matter what the basket is. So it's, there's a massive danger in over-reliance on anything. We saw tourism is a great example of that. It was hailed as something that was more stable than natural resource economies. And then we also saw COVID and what happened to the communities that were entirely reliant on tourism. So I would say outdoor recreation, one, is not, it overlaps with tourism, but it's not entirely synonymous with it. When we see the outdoor recreation, like advanced manufacturing and design components and businesses and all these other types of things, it's a really important part of any community's economy, and their social and quality of life. So it's about just integrating it with the rest of the community. Like I said earlier, not trying to replace something or take it over.
All right, we had another question here about active transportation networks and connections within the guide. Did you touch on any of that, or was that sort of outside the scope?
We definitely like peripherally, I'd say that we touch on it. When I think of active transportation, um, it's definitely related to outdoor recreation, but it's not the same thing, right? Like if you think about biking to work along a roadway, I wouldn't consider that outdoor recreation. But there's definitely places where, active transportation and outdoor recreation overlap. And in some cases, the objectives are similar. So things like healthy communities. And then I think the other link is the discussion in the guidebook around the importance of infrastructure that supports outdoor recreation. So that includes transportation networks that help, diverse folks be able to access your recreation assets. And as we continue to think about kind of reducing carbon emissions and the impact of outdoor recreation, ensuring active transportation options become embedded into those networks becomes more important. Yeah, it's also an example of an opportunity to kind of look for co-benefits between community priorities. I'm sure active transportation is a priority for a whole bunch of communities. And so I'm looking for opportunities to link those through funding or, use of scarce resources is a good one.
Great. Excellent. I'm not seeing any other questions there, so why don't we wrap this up with just a final question for everyone, if you don't mind kind of chiming in on this. So kind of thinking of this as what is the most important first step or the most important step that people can take or should take when considering this guidebook and how to use it, and making it so that it's actually bringing about action or change in a community. Lauren, why don't we start with you? Put you on the hot seat. Oh, you're muted there.
Sorry. Really, it's about using it to spark a conversation, like use it to start one of those relationships that we've heard or that we know is so critical. Maybe through that conversation, you identify your champion, or maybe you discover that you're the champion that's needed to kind of push this through your community's undoubtedly long list of priorities.
Great. Jesse?
Yeah, I think the most important question is why? Why are you doing this? What are your goals? I think as long as you have that in mind first, and then you can build that team around that. It's not always been easy through this Trora process, and I think that that's what we keep going back to, is why did we start this in the first place? Because we had all these, great reasons that we would work better together, and I think that's important to always have that to come back to.
All right, Sarah?
I think so. Place really matters in this conversation. Everybody's going to use this guidebook in a different way. Everybody's going to have a different why that they're aiming for. And so for me, just take the time to work through that read me first section, figure out where you're at, and figure out those things that you don't know that you need to be aware of. That's a hard thing for all of us, because if you don't know what you don't know, but that can prevent conflict and challenges and create efficiencies down the line if you just take a minute, figure out what you know, what you don't know, who you need to know, set yourself up for all of the important steps that come later, instead of, just blindly diving into the shallow end of something that you shouldn't have been diving into.
Excellent. And go ahead, Sherry Lynn. Final word.
I think I would add in there, have lots of patience and clear and manage expectations going into this. There'll be lots of ups and downs along the way, and it's not going to be fast by no means, but definitely worth it as you're going through.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you all. Thanks for the great discussion. And thanks to everybody that tuned in. Just keep an eye on your inboxes tomorrow for an email that will include a recording to this webinar, a link to the guidebook, and more information about it. There's a few different resources that go with it that you can watch for as well, like a one-pager that kind of summarizes everything, makes it really digestible. You can also request a personal presentation about the guidebook, and there'll be information about doing that in that email. And we encourage you to share the guidebook far and wide, share it with everyone you know. We know that things that are shared within personal networks are more trusted and more likely to be looked at and considered. So, if you're interested in this, interested in outdoor recreation in your community, get it out there to the people that you know in your community and have them share it as well. So a big thanks to everybody that took part, including especially Lauren, Sarah, Sherry Lynn, and Jesse. And a big thanks to the Economic Trust of the Southern Interior and the province's Rural Economic Diversification and Infrastructure Program for making the guidebook possible. This webinar is part of a regular series. The best way to find out about our next webinar, the guidebook and everything that goes with it, and everything else that the Outdoor Recreation Council does, is to head on over to orcbc.ca. And please, finally, stick around for that survey. It's going to pop up right after I sign off here, and it just helps us do a better job with everything we do at the ORCBC. So it'd be very helpful if you took the time to fill it out. And with that, I will say goodbye, and thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.